I volunteered at a local cafe after my divorce. People thought I was a lonely retiree with nothing left. When a famous food critic gave the place 5 stars, they didn't know I owned the entire chain. After my divorce, I thought silence would be my friend. It wasn't. It sat beside me at breakfast, followed me around the house, and slept in the empty space where my husband used to be. So one morning, instead of crying into another cup of stale coffee, I put on my old denim jacket, tied my silver hair in a messy bun, and drove into town. That's how I found myself standing in front of Maple Street Cafe, a cozy little spot with chalkboard menus, ivy crawling up the brick, and the smell of fresh cinnamon rolls spilling out the door. They had a handwritten sign taped to the window. Volunteers needed. Smiles required. I chuckled. After 30 years of running a home, raising 2 kids, and managing my husband's moods, I figured I had plenty of practice in smiling through chaos. So I walked in. The place was buzzing. College kids with laptops, mothers with strollers, old men arguing about baseball, just the kind of ordinary noise I'd been craving. Behind the counter stood a young woman, maybe 22, with a flour-dusted apron and the kind of energy I hadn't felt in decades. "Hi," she said. "Looking for a latte or—" "Actually," I smiled, tapping the sign. "I saw you need volunteers." She grinned. "Oh, you'd be a lifesaver. We're short-staffed. I'm Emily." And that's how it began. I started the next morning. They handed me an apron with a small coffee stain already baked into the fabric and taught me how to work the register. I hadn't done anything like that in years, but it felt good, simple, grounded. By day 3, I was wiping down tables, brewing pots of coffee, and learning all the regulars' names. There was Frank, the retired firefighter who came in every morning at 8 sharp for his black coffee and crossword. There was Mrs. Peterson, who brought her knitting and stayed until noon, pretending not to eavesdrop on everyone. And then there was the Johnson couple, who still held hands after 40 years of marriage. Watching them used to sting a little. But it also reminded me that love could survive, even if mine hadn't. Word around town spread fast. "Did you see that woman volunteering at the cafe?" they whispered at the grocery store. Bless her heart. Must be lonely after the divorce, I heard it. Of course I did. But I didn't mind. Let them think what they wanted. They didn't know that the cafe, my cafe, had been mine for years. You see, long before my husband and I split, we'd invested in a few small businesses together. While he chased status and luxury, I'd fallen in love with the idea of creating something warm and human, something that felt like home. Maple Street Cafe had been one of my first solo projects, bought quietly under a trust in my name. He never paid much attention to it. Said coffee shops were cute but not serious investments. When the divorce papers came, and he tried to strip away everything, he didn't even think to ask about the cafes. He thought I was left with nothing but a modest alimony and a too large house full of memories. I let him think that. So yes, while the town saw a lonely, aging woman pouring coffee for tips, I was quietly running an entire chain of cafes across 3 states. But there's a kind of joy in being underestimated. Working there reminded me of who I'd been before the marriage, before the compromises and the quiet disappointments. I was good with people. I liked hearing their stories, learning their quirks, noticing how they took their coffee. One day a teenage boy spilled a latte all over his homework and looked like he might cry. I just patted his shoulder, handed him a napkin and said, "If that's the worst thing that happens today, you're doing fine." He smiled. Those were the moments that mattered. About a month in, Emily and I had developed a rhythm. She baked, I brewed. We shared stories during the lull between breakfast and lunch. She was saving up to go to culinary school. I told her she already had more heart than half the chefs I'd known. One afternoon, she pulled me aside, eyes wide with excitement. "You won't believe this," she whispered. "We got a reservation. A food critic, someone big, from the Chronicle. They're coming Saturday." I raised an eyebrow. "Really?" "Yeah, I'm terrified. We can't mess this up." I wanted to laugh. I'd dealt with critics before, both professional and personal, but I didn't let her see that. Instead, I smiled and said, "Then we'll make it perfect." The rest of the week, the cafe buzzed like a hive. We scrubbed every surface, tested recipes, and practiced plating like we were competing on a cooking show. The regulars teased us, saying we'd gone fancy overnight. Saturday came, crisp and golden, with sunlight pouring through the windows. I wore my best apron, clean, no stains, and tied it a little tighter. Around 11, the door opened, and in walked a man in his 50s, dressed in a simple grey suit. No entourage, no camera crew, just a small notebook and sharp eyes. I recognized him immediately. Elliot King, the infamous critic who could make or break restaurants with a single sentence. He ordered a cappuccino and a slice of Emily's new lemon chiffon cake. I made the coffee myself, carefully steaming the milk until it was silky. Emily set the cake down with trembling hands. Then we waited. He took one bite, then another. Then he closed his eyes, smiled slightly, and started writing. When he left, Emily exhaled so hard she nearly fell against the counter. "Do you think he liked it?" she whispered. I just smiled. I think he tasted more than lemon. 2 days later, his review hit the papers. A hidden gem tucked away on Maple Street, warm, unpretentious, and alive with heart. 5 stars. The cafe was packed within hours. Cars lined the street. Strangers came in saying, "Is this the cafe?" Emily cried when she read the review. I just kept pouring coffee. People came in every day after that, talking about the article, about how the little cafe run by locals was putting our town on the map. I overheard one woman say, "It's so sweet that old lady volunteers here." She must be proud of them, if only she knew. But I wasn't ready to tell anyone yet. The joy was in the secret, the freedom of being just the volunteer for once in my life. As I locked up that night, I turned off the lights, the scent of coffee still clinging to my hands, and whispered to myself, "Let them keep thinking I'm nobody." Because sometimes that's when you feel most alive. The morning after the review came out, Maple Street looked different. The little cafe that once sat quietly between the bookstore and the florist now glowed with life. Cars were already double parked by the time I arrived at 7. I could see people pressed against the windows, peeking inside, hoping for a table. It felt surreal, watching our sleepy cafe turn into a destination overnight. Emily was already inside, cheeks flushed pink, hands dusted with flour. "We sold out of muffins before 8, she shouted over the noise. 8 o'clock, I laughed, tying on my apron. "Looks like the world just discovered us." She grinned. "Us? You mean the cafe?" I bit back a smile. If only she knew the whole truth. I'd always been careful, keeping my ownership quiet. I wanted Maple Street Cafe to stand on its own charm, not the shadow of some unseen investor. Still, there was a strange satisfaction in knowing the success was blooming right before my eyes, right where I'd chosen to plant it. By mid-morning, the cafe was chaos, the good kind. The air was thick with espresso and chatter. I moved between tables, delivering lattes and clearing cups, while Emily worked the kitchen like a whirlwind. Customers complimented the coffee, the pastries, the wonderful volunteer who made the place feel like home. A woman from the local radio station stopped me on her way out. "You're just lovely," she said, smiling warmly. "What made you decide to volunteer here?" I gave her my practiced answer. "Oh, I just needed something to do after the divorce. This place gives me a reason to smile again." She nodded sympathetically. "Well, you've got a gift. You make people feel welcome." When she left, I took a deep breath and leaned against the counter. It was funny. Everyone thought I'd lost everything. But in truth, I'd gained something far more precious: anonymity, freedom. For once, I didn't have to impress anyone. I didn't have to host dinner parties or keep up appearances. I could just be. But success has a way of stirring curiosity. By the third week after the review, local reporters began dropping by, asking for interviews. Emily handled them beautifully, but I could see the exhaustion creeping into her smile. One afternoon, she found me wiping a table and said softly, "I don't know if I can keep up with this, Nora. It's too much. I never meant for things to get so big." I placed a hand on her shoulder. "You've done beautifully, sweetheart. Don't let the noise drown out your joy." She smiled weakly. "You talk like you've done this before." I looked at her then, really looked at her. She reminded me of myself at 30, hopeful, talented, afraid of her own success. "Let's just say I've been around a few noisy kitchens," I said. The truth is, I'd spent years building this cafe chain from scratch, quietly, deliberately, and without fanfare. I'd learned that success was both intoxicating and isolating. Everyone wants a piece of it once they notice it. That's why I'd stepped back years ago, letting managers handle operations while I focused on the quieter joy of creating spaces like this one. That evening, as we locked up, Emily turned to me. "You know, I don't think we'd have survived this rush without you." I smiled. "You would have. You just needed a little faith and a few extra napkins." She laughed, hugging me tightly. Her warmth caught me off guard. I hadn't realized how long it had been since someone hugged me just because they wanted to, not because they were supposed to. Over the next few weeks, life became a blur of faces and orders. People from neighboring towns came just to say they'd eaten at the five-star cafe. Some days, we had a line down the block, and through it all, I played my part. The quiet helper, the cheerful retiree who'd found purpose in pouring coffee. But word travels fast in small towns, and secrets have a way of leaking like steam from a kettle. One Saturday morning, as I was refilling sugar jars, a familiar face walked in, Janet Morris. She'd been one of my closest friends back when I was married, though we'd drifted after the divorce. She was dressed sharply as ever, with that same condescending smile she wore to charity luncheons. "Well, look at you, Nora," she said, scanning the cafe. "Volunteering, are you?" How quaint, I smiled politely. "Good to see you, Janet." "Coffee?" She smirked. "I'll have a cappuccino." "But tell me, what's it like working here after everything?" I could hear the subtext. After losing the house, after losing your husband, after falling off the social ladder. I kept my tone light. "Oh, it's peaceful. I like it." She tilted her head, studying me like she was looking for cracks. "You always were resilient. But really, darling, you should be enjoying retirement, not wiping tables." I smiled and slid the cup toward her. "Maybe this is my idea of retirement." She blinked, thrown off by my calm. Before she could respond, a customer interrupted, asking for a refill. I excused myself and left her sitting there, frowning into her cappuccino. Later that day, after she left, Emily came over with a puzzled expression. "That woman kept asking questions about the cafe," she said. She wanted to know who owns it. I shrugged. People love a mystery. But deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. That night, after closing, I lingered alone in the empty cafe. The air still smelled like sugar and espresso. I sat at the corner table, the same one I'd chosen my first day, and opened my phone. A notification popped up from the company's group chat, one I hadn't checked in weeks. Quarterly reports ready for approval, Ms. Whitman. Miss Whitman, that was me. The name that signed paychecks, made decisions, held the reins of every Maple Street cafe from Boston to Denver. For a moment, I hesitated before opening the file. Seeing the numbers, seeing how strong the brand had become, filled me with quiet pride. But there was something more powerful than pride that night. It was peace. I realized I didn't miss my old life. I didn't miss being the woman who had to be perfect all the time. I liked this version of me, the one who laughed with customers, spilled coffee now and then, and came home smelling like cinnamon. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that my secret wouldn't stay buried much longer. People were curious now, Janet especially, and if there was one thing she loved more than gossip, it was exposing it. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and whispered to the empty cafe, "Let them look. I'm not hiding. I'm just waiting." Outside, the night was cool and quiet. For the first time in years, I felt both invisible and powerful, like a secret recipe, simple on the surface, extraordinary underneath. The following week, the cafe's energy felt different. The regulars still laughed, the espresso machine still hissed, and the cinnamon rolls still vanished by noon. But beneath the noise, I sensed something shifting. Conversations would quiet when I passed by. People glanced at me just a little longer than before. I'd been around long enough to recognize the faint hum of gossip brewing, slow and steady, like coffee in a percolator. It didn't take long to trace it back to Janet. One afternoon, while I was restocking the pastry case, Emily came over with that worried crease between her brows. Nora," she began hesitantly, "a woman named Janet came in again this morning. She was asking some weird questions, wanted to know who handles our finances, who our landlord is, that sort of thing." I sighed softly, closing the display door. "Did you tell her anything?" "Of course not," she said quickly. "I told her I didn't know." But she was persistent. Of course she was. Janet had always been persistent, especially when it came to other people's business. She'd probably already called her husband, her realtor friend, and anyone else with access to property records. And sure enough, by Friday, the whispers had spread. I heard them when I was wiping tables, pretending not to listen. "That older volunteer, someone said she's not just helping out." "Oh, what do you mean?" "They say she might own the cafe." I kept my expression calm, my motions steady, as if I were completely unaware. Inside, though, my heart gave a small, amused flutter. So the secret was finally slipping through the cracks. That evening, I stayed late again, doing inventory in the quiet. I liked the cafe best at night. No clatter, no chatter, just the hum of the refrigerators and the faint smell of coffee lingering in the air. I was running my hand along the counter when the bell over the door jingled. "Nora? You here?" It was Janet. Of course it was. I looked up and smiled politely. "We're closed, Janet." She stepped inside anyway, her heels clicking on the tile. "I won't stay long. I just wanted to talk." I folded my arms lightly. "About what?" She glanced around, lowering her voice as if the espresso machine might be eavesdropping. "You've been holding out on us." I tilted my head, feigning innocence. "How so?" Her lips curved into a triumphant little smile. "Don't play coy. I made a few calls, looked up the ownership records. You own this cafe. In fact, you own all of them, don't you? Maple Street Cafe isn't just this little shop. It's a whole chain. I didn't answer. I simply met her gaze, calm and steady. That seemed to throw her off balance. Finally, I said softly, "You've been busy." She laughed, but it wasn't kind. "Oh, come now, Nora. You can't blame me for being curious. Everyone in town thought you'd lost everything after the divorce. You let them pity you while you sat on an empire of coffee shops." Her words were sharp, but I'd weathered worse. I smiled faintly. "It was never about pity, Janet. I just wanted peace." She blinked, caught off guard again. "Peace?" "Yes," I said. "After years of keeping up appearances, I wanted to disappear for a while." "So I did." Janet looked at me, confused, like she couldn't understand why someone would choose anonymity over applause. "Well," she said finally, adjusting her scarf, "the truth always comes out eventually. The town will know soon enough." "I'm sure they will," I replied calmly. "And when they do, they'll still get their coffee, and they'll still sit here chatting like they always have. Nothing changes." But of course, things did change. By the next morning, the news had spread like wildfire. The whispers weren't whispers anymore. They were full-blown conversations. When I walked in that day, heads turned. A few people smiled differently, a little too politely. Some avoided eye contact altogether, as if they didn't quite know how to treat me now that I wasn't just the lonely retiree, but the secret owner. Emily came rushing over, breathless. "Is it true?" she asked. "Are you really—" I set down my bag, tied on my apron, and nodded. "Yes, sweetheart. I started Maple Street Cafe years ago." Her eyes widened. "All of them?" "All of them," I said with a small smile. "But here, I'm just Nora." She stared for a moment, then broke into the biggest grin I'd ever seen. "You're incredible," she said, throwing her arms around me. "You've been here working beside me this whole time, and you never said a word." I hugged her back. "Because it wasn't about the title, Emily. It was about the people. About this." I gestured around the cafe, the warm light, the laughter, the scent of baked bread. I needed to remember why I started it all in the first place. The rest of the day was a blur of congratulations, disbelief, and curious smiles. Regulars came up to shake my hand, to tell me how inspiring my story was. Even Janet stopped by, pretending her discovery had been a kind gesture rather than a gossip-fueled dig. But not everyone's reaction was kind. A few customers muttered about deception, about how I'd lied to them. Some even accused me of playing the victim. I let them talk. They didn't know the whole story, and maybe they never would. Later that evening, as I was locking up, Emily turned to me. "You know," she said, "people are strange. When they thought you were poor and lonely, they felt sorry for you. Now that they know you're successful, they act like you tricked them." I smiled sadly. People like to fit others into neat little boxes. It's easier that way. But life doesn't fit into boxes. She nodded slowly, then asked, "So what now?" I looked out the window at the line of cars passing by, the glow of the streetlights reflecting off the cafe sign. "Now," I said quietly, "I stop hiding. I let people see me for who I am. And maybe I remind them that life doesn't end when someone leaves you. It just begins again in a different way." That night, as I drove home, I thought about the years I'd spent shrinking myself to make others comfortable. My marriage had taught me that wealth and status mean nothing when you're invisible in your own life. But this cafe, this little brick building with its chipped counter and flickering light, had given me something back. It had given me me. And though the town now knew my secret, I realized something beautiful. It didn't scare me anymore. I wasn't afraid of being seen, not by them and not by myself. The following Monday, I woke up before dawn, same as always. The world outside was still hushed, soft with that pale blue light that comes just before sunrise. I brewed myself a cup of black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and sat by the window watching the sky lighten. The newspaper on the table bore my name for the first time in years. Local volunteer revealed as founder of Maple Street cafe chain. It was surreal seeing my face beneath that bold headline. The article painted me as a mysterious entrepreneur, a quiet powerhouse who redefined retirement. I almost laughed. They made me sound like someone else entirely. But the truth was simpler. I was just a woman who'd lost herself and had slowly, painfully, found her way back through the smell of coffee and the sound of laughter. When I arrived at the cafe that morning, the parking lot was already full. There was a film crew setting up outside, their cables snaking across the sidewalk. Emily stood near the door, eyes wide. "They're from Channel 5, she whispered. "They want to interview you." I sighed, half amused, half exhausted. Of course they do. I wasn't fond of cameras. They made me feel like I had to wear a version of myself I'd long since outgrown. But Emily looked so hopeful, and I didn't have the heart to refuse. So, when the reporter approached, a cheerful young woman with glossy hair and a clipboard, I greeted her with a smile. "Ms. Whitman," she began brightly, "you've taken the internet by storm. People are fascinated by your story. A divorced retiree, volunteering at her own cafe chain. What inspired you to do it?" I thought for a moment before answering. After my marriage ended, I needed to remember who I was. I built these cafes years ago, but somewhere along the way I stopped feeling connected to them. So I came back, not as an owner, but as a person. I wanted to feel the heartbeat of it again. The reporter nodded eagerly. "That's beautiful. And how does it feel now that everyone knows?" I smiled softly. Free. A little strange, but mostly free. They filmed us for nearly an hour, asking about my life, the divorce, the cafe's growth, even my favorite coffee blend. When it was over, I stepped outside to catch my breath. The cool air hit my face, and I closed my eyes for a moment. I could hear the faint hum of traffic, the murmur of customers, the laughter drifting through the cafe windows. For the first time in years, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel like a woman left behind. I felt seen. But visibility comes with its own challenges. Within days, my inbox flooded with messages. Old acquaintances, reporters, even strangers. Some congratulated me. Others wanted advice, partnerships, money. A few, mostly from my old social circle, had more complicated motives. Janet, of course, was the first to call. "I just wanted to say I'm so proud of you," she said, her voice sugary sweet. "You've really turned things around, haven't you? Everyone's talking about you." I could almost hear the envy beneath her words. "Thank you, Janet," I said gently. "It's been quite the journey." "Oh, I can imagine," she replied. "You'll have to come to lunch with us sometime. The girls would love to hear all about it." I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. "Maybe. But honestly, I think I prefer the company I've got here." After I hung up, I chuckled softly. The girls she meant were the same women who'd pitied me during the divorce, whispering that I'd lost everything. Now they wanted to toast to my success. Life has a funny way of flipping its script. Meanwhile, Emily was thriving. With the cafe's popularity skyrocketing, I made her an official manager. The joy on her face when I told her was priceless. "You mean it?" "Me?" She'd gasped. "Of course," I said. "You've earned it." She threw her arms around me, tears in her eyes. I don't know what to say. Just promise me one thing, I told her. Don't lose the heart that makes this place special. The fame will fade, but kindness lasts. As the weeks went by, business boomed. Customers came from neighbouring cities, drawn by the story more than the coffee. The widow cafe, some called it. Though I wasn't technically a widow, I didn't correct them. Let them romanticize it if they wanted. But amid the chaos, there were moments of quiet grace that reminded me why I'd started this journey. One afternoon, a woman around my age came in alone. She sat by the window, stirring her tea long after it had gone cold. Something in her expression, distant, broken, felt familiar. I brought her a small plate of cookies and set it beside her without a word. She looked up, startled. "Oh, I didn't order these," I smiled. "They're on the house. You look like you could use something sweet." She blinked, eyes glistening. "My husband left me last month," she whispered. "After 40 years. I don't even know what to do with myself anymore." I sat across from her, lowering my voice. "I know that feeling. One day you wake up, and the world's rearranged itself without your permission." She gave a small, trembling laugh. "Exactly." I told her how I'd found my way back, not through grand gestures, but through small ones, brewing coffee, wiping tables, showing up. By the time she left, she was smiling, even if just a little. And when she walked out the door, she turned back and said softly, "Thank you for reminding me I still matter." After she left, I stood behind the counter and let the moment sink in. That was what this was all about. Not fame, not money, not proving anything to anyone. It was about connection, about helping people remember that even broken hearts can find rhythm again. That night, as I closed up, Emily joined me, humming a tune under her breath. "You know," she said, "since people found out who you are, the cafe feels even warmer somehow, like your story rubbed off on it." I smiled. Maybe it's not my story anymore. Maybe it's ours. The truth was, for the first time in a very long time, I felt exactly where I was meant to be. Not behind the curtain, not in the shadows, but right there in the middle of the noise and the warmth and the smell of coffee. And as I turned off the lights and stepped outside, I realized something simple but profound. I didn't need to hide behind humility anymore. I could be proud, quietly, honestly proud, of the woman I'd become. The past had taught me resilience. The cafe had taught me grace. And somewhere between those two lessons, I'd found something I never thought I would again. Joy. I hadn't felt this alive in years. The cafe buzzed around me like a beehive, each hum of conversation, each clink of a coffee cup, giving me purpose. It wasn't just about serving coffee anymore. It was about watching life happen. The morning regulars with their newspapers, the young couples trying to figure each other out over lattes, and the older ones who sat in comfortable silence. I'd begun to learn their stories, and maybe, through them, I was finding a way to heal my own. One afternoon, while I was restocking pastries, Emma walked in, her red lipstick too bright for her otherwise tired eyes. "Mum," she said, pulling me aside, "can we talk?" The way she said it, with that hint of apology wrapped in irritation, made me brace myself. We sat at a corner table, the same one where the sunlight hit around noon, casting soft gold across the wood. "I know you like it here," she began, "but I just don't get it. You're volunteering at a cafe when you could be traveling, joining book clubs, seeing friends. You act like this is your job." I smiled softly. "Maybe it is my job." She frowned. "You don't need a job. You've worked your whole life. Dad, let's not bring up your father," I interrupted gently, though my heart tightened at the mention. She sighed. "Okay, but people are talking." You know that, right? Mrs. Landry told me she saw you wiping tables, and she thought that I'd fallen on hard times, I finished for her, chuckling. Wouldn't be the first time people assumed something about me. Emma hesitated, biting her lip. I don't want people to pity you. Sweetheart, I said, reaching for her hand. Sometimes letting people underestimate you is the best way to see who they really are. She didn't understand. Not yet. And I didn't blame her. I had spent most of my life trying to prove myself, trying to keep up appearances. After the divorce, I realized appearances were nothing more than glass, beautiful, fragile, and completely transparent when held to the light. That same week, our cafe got a surprise. One of the baristas, Tyler, came running from the counter, nearly spilling a tray of cappuccinos. "Martha," he exclaimed, "you won't believe who's here." I turned, and there he was. Alan Richfield, the food critic whose words could make or break a restaurant overnight. He'd been on TV shows, his reviews syndicated in national papers. Everyone in the cafe froze. Even the espresso machine seemed quieter. Alan took a seat near the window, notebook already in hand. His presence alone electrified the air. People whispered, phones discreetly pointed in his direction. "Do you think he's here for us?" Tyler whispered. "I think," I said calmly, "we should just do what we do every day. Serve good coffee and be kind." Inside, though, my pulse quickened. I knew Alan, not personally, but through his patterns. He loved small-town authenticity, hated anything that felt contrived. And our little cafe, Sunny Bean, was exactly the kind of place he'd want to find. I went over, wiping my hands on my apron, and smiled. "Good afternoon, Mr. Richfield. Welcome to Sunny Bean. Would you like to hear today's specials?" He looked up at me, curious, maybe a little skeptical. "You work here?" "I do," I said simply. He nodded slowly. "I'll take whatever you think is best." Surprised me, I smiled. "All right. Give me a few minutes." In the kitchen, I asked Sarah, our chef, to prepare the lemon lavender scone with honey butter, my favorite. It was one of those recipes we'd added months ago, inspired by something I'd baked for a corporate meeting long before my retirement. I added a latte with oat milk and a drizzle of caramel, the kind of touch Alan loved writing about, a mix of simple and thoughtful. As I served it, he asked, "Are these your recipes?" I paused, a smile tugging at my lips. "Some of them, yes. But I prefer to think of them as ours." He nodded again, then tasted. One bite, two, then silence. His expression was unreadable. Tyler stood frozen behind the counter, mouthing, "What's he writing?" I shrugged, pretending not to care, but inside I was trembling. I wanted him to love it, not for the fame, not for the publicity, but because this cafe, these people, had become my second family. After he finished, Alan came over to me. "This place," he said, "feels like home." "You don't see that much anymore." I smiled, warmth spreading through me. "Thank you. That's the best compliment you could give." He nodded once, then left. No big fanfare, no dramatic moment, but the whole cafe exhaled at once, like we'd been holding our breath for too long. 2 days later, his review dropped online. "Hidden in plain sight," it began. "Sunny Bean Cafe captures the spirit of community dining, unpretentious, warm, and quietly excellent. The scones, particularly the lemon lavender, are divine. Whoever baked them knows the language of comfort 5 stars." The next morning, there was a line out the door. People from neighbouring towns drove in, eager to try the divine scones. The mayor even stopped by, posing for a photo beside our chalkboard sign. The other volunteers were ecstatic, though none of them knew the full story, that I wasn't just the woman behind the counter. I owned this cafe. I owned all the Sunny Beans across the state. But that wasn't a secret I was ready to reveal just yet. As the crowd grew, so did my pride. Not the kind of pride that makes you boast, but the kind that hums quietly in your chest, reminding you that life, even after heartbreak, can bloom again. Emma showed up that afternoon, eyes wide at the crowd. "Mom!" "What happened?" I grinned. "Just a little good news. We got 5 stars." She looked around, astonished. "This is amazing." "Wait, how are you so calm?" "Because, sweetheart," I said softly, "I knew this place was special long before anyone else did." She laughed, shaking her head. "You really do surprise me sometimes." I smiled, hiding the deeper truth behind her words. There was still more to reveal, more than she or anyone else could guess. Because the story of the Sunny Bean wasn't about a lonely retiree finding meaning. It was about a woman who had built an empire, one scone, one latte, and one quiet act of resilience at a time. And soon the world would know. The week after the review felt like living inside a dream. The cafe, once a quiet corner of comfort for locals, had turned into a full-blown attraction. We had lines snaking down the block before sunrise. The smell of roasted beans and buttered scones drifted out into the crisp morning air, pulling people in like bees to honey. Tyler could barely keep up at the register. Sarah was baking triple batches of pastries, and I floated between tables, helping where I could, smiling as strangers thanked me, though they didn't even know who I really was. "You must be the owner's mum or something," one young woman said kindly as I handed her a cappuccino. "You have that look, proud but quiet." I laughed softly. "Something like that." Every compliment felt like a tiny secret I got to tuck into my pocket. There was freedom in being invisible. People saw what they wanted to see. A kindly, older volunteer, someone filling her empty days with good deeds. I didn't need them to know the truth yet. For now, I just wanted to feel the success, not own it. But not everyone was thrilled about the attention. By Friday, our little team was exhausted. The lunch rush had been chaos, and Sarah slammed the kitchen door shut, her cheeks red and floured. "Martha," she said, pulling me aside, "we can't keep this up. We're running out of ingredients, sleep, and patience." I nodded. "I know. I'll handle it." That night, after we closed, I stayed behind, wiping tables in the empty cafe. The place was quiet again, soft jazz still playing on loop. I sat by the window, Alan Richfield's seat, and looked at the reflection of the string lights against the glass. It reminded me of another time, years ago, when I'd sat in another empty cafe, alone, after signing my divorce papers. Back then, I'd felt like a chapter had ended. But maybe, I thought now, it was just the beginning. I took out my phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in a while, my business partner, Mark. "Martha," he answered, surprise in his voice. "Haven't heard from you in months. How's retirement?" "Retirement's overrated," I said with a chuckle. "I think it's time we expand Sunny Bean again." He laughed. "Expand?" "The last time we talked, you wanted to sell half your shares." "I changed my mind," I said. "There's still life in me yet. And in this brand." There was silence on the other end. Then he said, "You really think it's time?" "Yes," I said firmly, "but not for the same reasons as before. This time, I'm doing it for the people who make this place alive. Sarah, Tyler, everyone. They've turned Sunny Bean into more than a cafe. It's a heartbeat." Mark exhaled slowly. "You always did have vision, Martha." I smiled to myself. Well, maybe I'm finally ready to stop hiding behind aprons and start leading again. The next morning I arrived early, just as the sunrise painted the sky peach and gold. I unlocked the door, the bell chiming softly as I stepped inside. There was something sacred about those quiet pre-dawn moments, the calm before the chaos. I poured myself a cup of black coffee and sat at the counter, planning. By 8 a.m., Emma walked in. She looked radiant, dressed in her usual business casual style, blazer, sleek ponytail, eyes full of curiosity. "Mum," she said, holding up her phone, "have you seen this? You're trending." I frowned. "Trending?" She thrust the screen toward me. There it was, a viral post on social media. Sunny Bean Cafe, small town, big heart. The volunteer grandma who stole a food critic's heart. The article had photos of me smiling behind the counter, handing out cookies to kids, chatting with customers. Someone had apparently taken candid shots during the rush. I blinked. "Oh, good heavens," Emma laughed. "Mom, people love you. Look at these comments. She reminds me of my grandmother. This is what community looks like. She's an angel. You're famous." "Famous," I repeated, shaking my head. "That's the last thing I wanted." "Come on," she teased. "Admit it. You love it a little." I smiled, though my thoughts were spinning. Fame was flattering, sure. But fame invited questions, ones I wasn't sure I was ready to answer. Later that afternoon, a local reporter arrived, wanting to do a feature. The whole staff was buzzing with excitement. Tyler nearly tripped over himself introducing me. "This is Martha," he said proudly. "She's the heart of Sunny Bean." The reporter smiled. "So, Martha, tell me, how did you end up volunteering here?" I hesitated. My mind flashed through the years, the board meetings, the sleepless nights building the franchise, the collapse of my marriage, the quiet mornings spent rebuilding myself through flour and coffee beans. But I kept my tone light. "Well," I said, "I just wanted to be useful again. To feel part of something." He smiled warmly. "Well, you certainly are. People love you." When he left, Emma cornered me. "Mum," she said softly, "why don't you just tell them the truth?" I sighed. "Because sometimes, Emma, people need a story more than they need the facts." She frowned. "You think hiding your success helps anyone?" "Maybe it helps me," I said, my voice quiet. "For the first time in my life, people like me for who they think I am, not what I own." Emma didn't respond, but I could tell she was thinking hard. That night, I walked through the quiet cafe again, running my hand along the worn wood of the counter. I thought about all the mornings I'd stood here, unseen, underestimated, free. But deep down, I knew Emma was right. Secrets have expiration dates, and mine was running out. As I turned off the lights, I looked once more at the chalkboard sign by the door. Sunny Bean, where every cup tells a story. I smiled to myself. Soon it would be time to tell mine. The morning after my conversation with Emma, I woke before dawn. Sleep had been restless. Too many thoughts tumbling in my mind, like beans in a grinder. The cafe was quiet when I arrived, the soft hum of the refrigerator the only sound. I switched on the lights, watching the warm glow fill the room, chasing away the grey edges of early morning. I brewed myself a cup of coffee and sat at my favourite table near the window, the one that caught the first blush of sunrise. The sky outside was painted in soft strokes of pink and orange, and for a fleeting second I felt calm. But that calm didn't last. Emma's words echoed in my head. "Why don't you just tell them the truth?" For weeks now, I had lived between two worlds, the woman who owned the cafe chain and the woman who served coffee in one of them. I had come here to heal, to reconnect with something real. But now the story had grown beyond me. It had turned into something public, something people were building myths around. And that was dangerous. By the time the staff started arriving, I'd already decided I couldn't hide forever. But the truth needed to come out my way, quietly, gracefully, and on my own terms. Morning, boss, Tyler said cheerfully, tossing his apron over his shoulder. I smiled. Morning, Tyler. You look like you actually slept last night. He laughed. Barely. The espresso machine's starting to sound like my grandmother's old car. We might need a new one soon. I'll take care of it, I said automatically, then caught myself. He tilted his head. You? You mean we, right? Right, I said quickly. We. I busied myself wiping the counter, but the slip-up lingered. The truth was clawing its way closer to the surface. That afternoon, the cafe was packed again, news cameras outside, people taking selfies by the famous scone counter. I worked the register with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. A familiar voice startled me. Martha? I looked up and froze. It was Daniel, my ex-husband. He stood there, looking older but still carrying that same air of confidence that used to fill a room. He wore a navy jacket, his salt and pepper hair neatly combed. For a moment, all the old memories flooded back. The boardrooms, the dinner parties, the tension that filled our silence in the final years. What are you doing here? I asked, keeping my tone even. I read about this place, he said, glancing around. Didn't realize you were working here until Emma mentioned it. She did? He nodded. She's proud of you, you know. But I had to see it myself. I crossed my arms. Well, here it is. The glamorous life of a cafe volunteer. He gave a small, wry smile. That's not what I see. There was something in his tone, curiosity, maybe even admiration. He ordered a coffee and sat down, watching me as if I were a stranger he was trying to figure out. As I handed him his cup, he said quietly, You always did love the smell of coffee. Remember the first cafe we opened? Of course, I said softly. You wanted to name it after yourself. He chuckled. And you insisted on calling it Sunny Bean. Said it sounded like hope. I met his eyes, surprised. You remember that? I remember more than you think, he said, sipping his coffee. And I remember how you used to dream bigger than I did. Guess I forgot that part when we started fighting over numbers. The air between us was thick with unspoken history. I wanted to tell him everything, how I'd rebuilt myself, how I'd kept the brand alive even when he left, how I'd found joy in anonymity. But instead, I said, You should know something, Daniel. I'm not just volunteering here. He raised an eyebrow. No. No, I said, steadying my voice. This cafe, this chain, it's mine now. I bought out your shares years ago. Every Sunny Bean that still stands is because I refused to let it fall apart. For once, Daniel was speechless. His expression softened, and he set down his cup. You did all this? Yes. He exhaled, shaking his head slowly. I underestimated you. I smiled faintly. Everyone did. He looked at me, pride flickering in his eyes. Then maybe it's time people stop underestimating you. Don't hide this, Martha. You built something incredible. Own it. I didn't expect those words from him, but somehow they felt like permission. Permission to stop being small for everyone else's comfort. After he left, I stood for a long time staring at the front door. The bell above it swayed gently as it closed, the sound lingering like an echo of change. That evening, after closing, I gathered the staff. They looked confused as I asked everyone to sit. The lights were low, the smell of coffee still rich in the air. I need to tell you all something, I began. My hands trembled slightly, but my voice was steady. When I first came here, I didn't want anyone to know who I was. I said I was a volunteer because I wanted to feel the heart of this place again. I wanted to remember why I started Sunny Bean in the first place. Their eyes widened. Yes, I continued. I started Sunny Bean. Years ago. And every location you've ever seen. including this one, came from that dream. The room was silent, only the ticking of the wall clock filling the space. Tyler was the first to speak. Wait, you're the founder? The founder? I nodded. Guilty as charged? Then laughter. Warm, surprised, disbelieving laughter. Sarah clapped her hands together, smiling through tears. All this time, and you've been wiping tables next to us. I told you, I said, smiling. Titles don't matter as much as teamwork. But inside, I felt a rush of relief so pure it almost hurt. The truth was out. No more pretending, no more secrets. Just me, standing in front of people who finally saw me for all that I was. Tyler grinned. Guess we're working for the coolest boss ever, I laughed. Only if you promise not to treat me any differently. As they all cheered, I looked around the cafe. The string lights, the mismatched chairs, the smell of cinnamon and espresso, and realized this was what I'd been searching for all along. Not fame, not revenge, not validation, just connection. That night, as I locked up, I whispered softly to the empty room, we did it. The morning after I told the staff the truth, the air in the cafe felt different, lighter somehow, yet charged with something new. When I walked in, everyone stopped what they were doing and clapped. My face flushed crimson as I waved my hands. All right, I said, laughing. You're going to make me spill my coffee before I've even had a sip. Sarah grinned, flour streaking her cheek. Sorry, boss. I mean, Martha. We're just proud. Tyler leaned on the counter. It's crazy. You were here, shoulder to shoulder with us, all this time, and we had no idea. I smiled, feeling a warmth I hadn't felt in years. That's the thing about starting over. You don't always need to announce it. Sometimes you just live it. But as the morning rush hit, I noticed something different in how they treated me. There was respect, yes, but also hesitation. They second-guessed themselves, looking to me for every decision. Sarah wouldn't change a recipe without asking. Tyler asked permission before adjusting the music. It felt strange. I had wanted honesty, not hierarchy. Around noon, I pulled them aside. Listen, I said gently. Nothing changes. I may own this place, but I'm still part of this team. You still make the magic happen. Don't start walking on eggshells because of a title. Sarah nodded, though her expression stayed cautious. It's just hard not to see you differently now, knowing what you've built. I understand, I said, but I didn't build this alone. I just gave it roots. You're the branches now. The metaphor seemed to land. By afternoon, laughter and rhythm returned to the kitchen, and the familiar hum of teamwork filled the air again. Still, my revelation had stirred something beyond the cafe. News travelled fast in small towns, and faster online. The story that had gone viral before, the lonely retiree volunteering for meaning, now had a new headline. Secret cafe owner revealed, the woman behind the Sunny Bean empire. By evening, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Calls from old investors, emails from journalists, requests for interviews, brand collaborations, even a podcast invitation from a show I'd once dreamed of being featured on. Emma came over that night, a mix of awe and exasperation in her face. Mom, do you realize what's happening? You're trending again. People love this story. I groaned, sinking onto the couch. I didn't plan for any of this. She smiled. That's what makes it so good. You're real. You're not some billionaire hiding behind a PR team. You're you. I don't want to be famous, I muttered. She laughed. Too late for that. I turned to her. Then help me do something meaningful with it. Her smile softened. You mean like charity? I nodded. Something bigger than just coffee. Maybe a foundation, a program for women who are starting over after divorce or retirement, or loss. A place where they can work, learn, rebuild. Emma's eyes lit up. You'd change so many lives, Mum. I just want women to know that life doesn't end at 50, I said quietly. You don't have to fade away when your marriage ends or your kids move out. You can still build something beautiful. She reached over, taking my hand. You already have. The next day, I brought the idea to the team. They were thrilled. Sarah even teared up. You mean we'd train other women here? Teach them baking, business, management? Exactly, I said. We'll call it the Second Brew Program, because everyone deserves a second shot. Tyler laughed. That's genius, I smiled. Then let's make it real. Within weeks, things began to move. The story caught national attention, not because of the fame, but because of the message. Donations came in, women reached out from across the country, sharing stories of heartbreak and rebirth. One letter from a woman named Lila stayed with me. She wrote, "After my husband died, I thought my life was over. Then I read about you. I started baking again. Thank you for reminding me that it's never too late." I sat at my kitchen table, reading that letter over and over, tears blurring the words. For so long I had chased success, then hidden from it. Now, for the first time, I felt like it had found its purpose. Meanwhile, Daniel reappeared, not uninvited, but tentatively curious. He came by one afternoon holding 2 coffees. "Thought I'd bring peace offerings," he said. I smirked. "You finally buying me coffee?" "That's new." He chuckled. "Well, I figured I owed you more than 1 cup." We sat by the window, the same spot he'd first walked into weeks before. He looked around the cafe, now filled with women of all ages, laughing, learning, rebuilding. "You've created something special here," he said quietly. "I didn't see it before." I nodded, not out of pride, but peace. It's funny, isn't it? Sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what you're capable of. He smiled. You always were capable. I just didn't appreciate it. There was no bitterness left in me, only gratitude for the lessons that had carved me into who I was now. Later that night, after closing, I stood by the chalkboard again. The message now read, "Sunny Bean, home of the Second Brew Program." I ran my fingers over the chalk dust, smiling. From the outside, it was just a cafe, a cozy spot with good coffee and better company. But for me, it had become the symbol of everything I'd learned: resilience, reinvention, grace. As I turned off the lights, I whispered to the empty cafe, "We're not done yet." Because I could feel it. This was only the beginning of a new chapter. The morning after the review went viral, I woke up to over 100 messages on my phone. Some were from old friends I hadn't heard from in years. Others were from local reporters wanting a quote. But what made me pause were the ones from my former husband, Michael. "So you were hiding an empire," his message read, followed by another. "I underestimated you, as usual." I didn't respond. I just stared at his words for a while, sipping my coffee slowly, letting the warmth ground me. There was a time when I'd have craved his acknowledgement, but now it just felt irrelevant. By the time I got to the cafe, the line stretched out the door. The staff was buzzing, people were taking selfies under the Cup of Joy sign, and the air carried that beautiful mix of roasted beans and excitement. Olivia spotted me and waved me over. "You did this," she said, eyes shining. "You and your crazy quiet magic." I laughed, shaking my head. "No, we did this." Every smile, every cup of coffee, every story shared across these tables. This is us. Inside, the hum of conversation had a new tone: curiosity, admiration, disbelief. Some regulars looked at me differently now, whispering as I passed. "That's her," I heard one woman say, leaning toward her friend. "The owner. The secret owner." I smiled politely, resisting the urge to hide back behind the counter. I wasn't used to being seen this way. Later that afternoon, I received a call from the critic himself, Daniel Rowe. His voice was calm, deep, and sincere. "Margaret, I owe you an apology," he said. "I had no idea who you were when I wrote that review. I just fell in love with your cafe." I chuckled softly. "That's the best compliment you could have given me, Daniel. That you loved it without knowing whose it was." He hesitated before saying, "The world deserves to know your story. A woman rebuilding her life, quietly running something extraordinary. That's rare." His words lingered long after the call ended. For years, I'd let my worth be defined by others, by my marriage, my age, my supposed loneliness. Now, someone saw me for what I'd built, not what I'd lost. The following week, a local TV crew came to film a segment. They asked if I'd be comfortable sharing my journey, from divorce to cafe volunteer to owner. I said yes, though my heart thudded with nervousness. As the cameras rolled, I found myself speaking freely about the emptiness after the divorce, the fear of starting over at 60, the unexpected joy of brewing lattes and connecting with people again. When the interview aired, messages flooded in from women all over the country. Some said they'd left loveless marriages and didn't know what to do next. Others told me they'd always dreamed of owning a small cafe, but never dared. One message hit me hard. "You made me believe it's not too late for me." I sat in my kitchen that night, tears sliding down my cheeks, realizing that maybe this was my purpose all along, to remind others, and myself, that life doesn't end when one chapter closes. The following days were a whirlwind. Investors reached out, wanting to expand the cafe chain further. TV hosts invited me to talk about second chances and late bloomers. But I was careful. I didn't want fame or fortune. I'd had both, in different forms. I wanted connection, authenticity, peace. So I turned down most offers, choosing instead to stay close to the heart of what started it all: people, coffee, and quiet kindness. Olivia and I sat one evening after closing, sipping leftover cappuccinos under the dim cafe lights. "You know," she said, "when you first walked in, I thought you were just lost." I smiled. "I was," I admitted. "But sometimes, being lost is how we find the right place." She reached across the table, squeezing my hand. "You didn't just find a place, Maggie. You built one for all of us." That night, I drove home through streets lined with amber light and falling leaves. The radio played soft jazz, and the city hummed softly around me. I thought of the years I'd spent shrinking myself, being quiet when I wanted to be bold, being small when I wanted to shine. I thought of the nights I sat alone, wondering if my life had already happened. But now, I knew the truth. Life doesn't expire. It evolves. When I got home, I opened my journal, the one I'd started the day I first walked into the cafe as a volunteer. On the last page, I wrote, "Today, I served coffee to a woman who told me she started painting again after 20 years. She said seeing me on TV made her believe in beginnings. Maybe that's what I've been doing all along, not running a business, but brewing courage, one cup at a time." I closed the book, exhaled, and smiled. My journey wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But it was mine. And as I looked out at the quiet night, I realized this was only the beginning of another beautiful chapter. The morning air was crisp and golden as I unlocked the cafe for what felt like the 1,000th time. Yet this day was different. The quiet hum of dawn felt heavier with anticipation, though I didn't yet know exactly why. Emma had called last night, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Mom, today's going to be big. Just trust me." She refused to tell me what she had planned, which made me grin despite the fluttering nerves in my chest. Inside, the staff was already bustling. Sarah was kneading dough at record speed, Tyler was lining up cups with precision, and Olivia was arranging flowers in small mason jars along the windowsill. I paused in the doorway, taking it all in: the laughter, the smells, the tiny chaotic symphony of life in motion, and felt a swell of pride that went beyond ownership or recognition. This was home, in every sense. "Morning, everyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Let's make it a good one." Tyler grinned. "It will be. Feels like something big is about to happen." I laughed softly, brushing flour from my hands. I had a sense of what he meant, though I still wanted to see it unfold. By mid-morning, the cafe was filled with its usual mix of regulars and newcomers. The line stretched down the block, the excitement palpable. Then, right at noon, Emma appeared at the door with a camera crew and a small stage set up in the corner. A hush fell over the crowd. "Maggie," she called, looping her arm through mine. "Come on! Time to see what I've been up to." I followed, curiosity mingled with a touch of apprehension. She guided me to the small stage, where a banner hung above: "Sunny Bean, celebrating second chances." Below it, dozens of women, some young, some older, many with shy smiles, stood waiting. They were graduates of the Second Brew program, all of whom had come to show what the cafe had inspired in their lives. I blinked, overwhelmed. "Emma, what is all this?" "Look around," she said softly, squeezing my hand. "You've touched lives, Mum. People you've never met, people who were hurting, are standing here today because of you, and they want you to know it." One by one, women stepped forward, sharing their stories. A woman who had left a long marriage found the courage to open her own bakery. Another, recently retired and unsure what to do next, had started a book club that now included dozens of members from across the city. Some told me they had begun volunteering, others had gone back to school, and a few had even reconnected with estranged family. Each story was a thread, weaving together into something far larger than coffee or pastries, something eternal and human. Tears pricked my eyes, but I kept my voice calm. "I never intended to inspire anyone," I said softly. "I was just trying to find my own way back." A woman stepped forward and handed me a small, handwritten card. On it, in neat, looping script, were the words, "You reminded me that it's never too late to begin again. Thank you for believing in us when we didn't believe in ourselves." I could feel my chest tightening, a mix of humility and joy so profound it left me momentarily breathless. I looked out at all the faces, bright, earnest, hopeful, and realized that the journey had never been just about me. It had been about connection, about shared courage, about finding the threads that tie us to each other, even after loss. Later, as the crowd dispersed and the cafe settled into its familiar rhythm, Daniel appeared at the doorway. He'd come not with cameras or interviews, just quietly, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "Mind if I sit?" he asked. "Not at all," I said, gesturing to the empty chair beside me. He handed me a cup, and we sat in silence for a moment, listening to the low murmur of conversation, the clatter of cups, the occasional laughter from the corner where a group of young women were practicing latte art. "You did it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "We did it," I corrected, smiling. "I couldn't have done it alone." He nodded. "I guess I never realized. You were never just volunteering. You were creating something bigger than yourself, something enduring, I suppose," I said, swirling my coffee slowly. "That's what happens when you stop trying to prove yourself to the world and start living for it instead." Daniel studied me, a small smile tugging at his lips. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." I shook my head gently. "It's not too late for anyone, Daniel. Even you." The day waned into evening, and as the golden sunlight spilled across the cafe's wooden floor, I walked through the rooms slowly, running my hand along counters, brushing fingers over chalkboard messages. I paused at the little stage Emma had set up, imagining all the stories, all the laughter, all the people who had found a spark of themselves here. For the first time in years, I felt completely whole. Not because of accolades or viral fame, not because of critics or headlines, but because I had come to the end of one chapter and found myself in the beginning of another, one built on purpose, connection, and joy. When the lights were dimmed and the last customer had left, I stood alone in the cafe, breathing in the familiar aromas of coffee, pastries, and sunlight on wood. I whispered softly to the empty room, "Thank you for everything." Then, in the quiet, I laughed. A soft, full, unburdened laugh. I had spent years rebuilding, proving, hiding, and now, finally, I could simply be. The empire, the cafes, the viral fame, they were all part of the story, yes. But the real gift had been the courage to live fully, authentically, and with heart. I turned off the lights and stepped outside, the night air crisp and clear. Above, stars sparkled faintly, and I felt a quiet thrill, as if the universe itself was celebrating. For the first time, I didn't feel lonely, overlooked, or small. I felt radiant, whole, and infinitely capable of new beginnings. And as I walked home, I realized the most profound truth of all. Sometimes the life you think you've lost is only waiting for you to step back in, claim it, and share it with the world. The cafe would continue to grow, the programs would flourish, and women would continue to find themselves in the warmth of its walls. And I would continue to be there, not just as the owner, not just as a volunteer, but as someone who had learned that the heart is the most powerful thing we ever have. I smiled into the night, whispering softly to myself, "This is exactly where I'm meant to be."